because I know this man's schedule this week. So I appreciate his presence on the island, and I know you have yourselves this week. So let's just pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you say that when we gather together, you're with us. And God, you say the numbers 2 or 3. And yet, Lord, there are so many of us today, and you have been so lavishing of that love and that presence with us. So just as Rob just shares what's on his heart in the final moments of our time gathered together, I pray, God, that you would just bless him as he is faithful to that calling of a child of God. And as he imparts to us your words, God, may we receive them, and may they go deep and bring about great transformational change, that we may reflect Jesus in everything that we are. In your name, amen.
First of all, an amazing thank you to those of you who became partners. We were overwhelmed, to be honest, and I'm really, really grateful to you. If any of you want to do it at the end, or perhaps you bought some and I wasn't able to sign your book and you'd like me to, I'd be really glad to do it at the end, so we'll be there then. Do you know, a friend of mine is a psychologist, and he was helping me with one of my books some years ago, a book I wrote on teenagers, I think it was, and he said to me, you know, Rob, most people believe a future event will make them happy. When I get married, if we move house, if I win the lottery. Sometimes it can be something quite small, like when we go out on Saturday night with our friends, we'll be really happy. He said, you know what, Rob, I know life is difficult, but really, really happy people grasp it now. Even if life is difficult, as much as possible to grasp it now. Because now is all that we have. And you and I together, in this moment, in this now, is very, very precious. I've loved being with you over these couple of days. I mean it. It's been an absolute joy to be here. And to listen to the speakers and to be part of the worship and just speak with each of you as much as possible. Thank you. It's been absolutely amazing. Before I started, I thought I would just try and show you that little Harry clip again. But for those who weren't here last night, just let me very, very quickly fill you in. My daughter was very ill in September, very seriously ill. And I'm holding her hand in hospital there, and she seems to be making a recovery now, for which we're grateful. But pray for Katie if you have a moment. It's very slow and very tentative, but we thank God that she seems to be turned a corner. And while she was in the middle of all this darkness, I heard somebody sing that lovely song, Christ Alone, Cornerstone, and that phrase in it, my anchor holds within the veil. And that phrase became very precious to me as I thought about it over those couple of days, my anchor. And the main thing is not the size of the anchor, but where it's sunk. Our anchor is sunk in the very presence of God. And then on the following Saturday, I was taking little Harry to the cinema. And as I held his hand and we walked into this big complex, he began to sing. As I said last night, I know he's only 4, and I know he doesn't really understand what he's singing. And in the middle, he does seem to go into tongues for a while, but it is still remarkable. You know, the incredible thing is that Jesus said, if you really want to understand God and the kingdom, you must become like a child. That is not to become childish, but to become childlike. And as I was listening to Harry singing, you can imagine tears streaming down my face as I am filming him. But I thought it was worth you seeing the whole thing, so let's have a listen to little Harry.
Hope is built on nothing less.
Can you get the lights down?
And Jesus' blood immortalness. I did not trust the sweetest friends in holy trust in Jesus' name. Christ alone, cornerstone, we make strong and say in love through the storm. We make all mountain all. Christ alone, saying in love through the storm. We make on launching Christ alone. And that's it.
You know, Diane has told me some time ago a way she has started reading the Bible, particularly the Gospels, my wife Diane. And she says, Robert, I don't see myself as a great academic. I don't know whether that's true or not. But she says, I don't see myself as a great theologian. But she says, I've found a way of reading the Gospels which has revolutionized it for me. She said, I try to imagine myself in the story. I actually put myself in the characters. I try to imagine the sounds. I try to imagine the smells. I try to imagine all that's going on. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, look, the other day, and she said, imagine this, she said, and she read me that bit where they bring a blind man to Jesus. The guy's friends bring him to Jesus, and Jesus takes him by the hand, and he leads him away from the others. And then he touches him, and he fingers in his hand, and he heals him. And she said, imagine it, Rob, imagine what was going on there. She said his friends brought him to Jesus. You know, she said, Rob, sometimes in your Christian life, you come to a stage where you can't do it for yourself. You need others to help you, others to pray for you, others. Sometimes you can't even pray yourself sometimes, you feel, and others stand by you during that time. And they came and they brought him to Jesus. And then she said, Jesus took his hand. Imagine what that must have felt like. He's blind and they say, trust this man, and he holds his hand. Imagine what that felt like. And then Jesus was leading him. Where was he taking him? What was going through that blind man's mind? And then suddenly he could see. He could see. As you think about that way of reading the Bible, let me read you this and try and imagine your way into it. When Jesus had crossed over by the boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. It's Mark 5:21. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there, and seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so she'll be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. Think your way now into this. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She'd suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, spent all she had, but instead of getting better, she grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched the edge of his cloak. Because she thought, if I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed. And immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body she was freed from her suffering. And at once Jesus realized that power had gone out of him, and he turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? You see the people crowding against you, the disciples asked, and yet you asked who touched me? But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. And the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear. And she told him the whole truth. And he said, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. Be free from your suffering. It's an incredible story, isn't it? You know, this woman had some kind of blood disorder that made her unclean. In Jewish eyes, she was totally unclean. If you touched this woman, you had to go home and wash from head to foot. If this woman sat on your chair, you had to burn the chair. If she sat on your bed, you had to burn the bed. She should have never, ever been out in public. She should have never been amongst people. And somehow she hears that this Jesus is coming to town, and she sees in him not just her last hope, but her only hope. And somehow she gets the courage to go out amongst people again, and she comes out and she's in the crowd. Meanwhile, Jesus is hurrying along to try to heal Jairus' daughter. And she sees him going by, and suddenly she reaches out, and 1 minute, there's this rush of people, bodies everywhere, and noise and hassle and tears. They go into what looks like a funeral. The problem with Jesus is he ruined every funeral he went to. He eventually ruined Jairus' daughter's funeral. He ruined the widow of Nain's son's funeral. He even ruined his own funeral. It was impossible that death be an overcomer with him. He said, nobody takes my life from me. I lay it down on myself, I take it. He gave up his spirit. Here is the great victor over death. But all that's in the future. They didn't know what was going on. Just this incredible crowd rushing along towards Jairus' daughter. And suddenly she reaches out and she just touches the edge of his cloak. Something she touched the 5 tassels that were on the end of a rabbi's coat. In Nazi Germany, the Jewish people used to wear the tassels on their underclothes. It spoke of the 5 books of the law. Something that what it means, the edge, as they swang, the tassels swang as he walked. He gently touched and she touched, and immediately it was as if the film freezes. And everybody stays just where they are. And the master says, who touched me? And the disciples say, everybody is touching you. No, somebody touched me. And suddenly she comes out and she pours out the whole story. And he looks at her and he says, daughter. Daughter. Do you know what that means? It means you belong. It means you belong to me. A few hours ago, you were afraid to go out, weren't you? Because you didn't belong to anybody, and nobody wanted to belong to you. But you belong to me. Daughter, your faith has saved you. And then that lovely Jewish word, shalom. Your faith has saved you. Or in the Aramaic, which means the very embodiment of peace. Go in peace. Do you ever crave that? Do you ever crave that sense of peace? He can give it to you, the one who stills the storm. When he said, daughter, he said what one of our speakers said this morning. You matter. You matter. I think it was Helen. You matter. I told you a moment ago about my mum. My mum was an office cleaner. She could read and write, but not much more than that. And when I was 11, I passed the 11 plus. I don't know how I managed to do that. I was the only kid in my street who did it. But as soon as I got to this school, I realized it was a dreadful mistake. It was like Mars. These kids had things that I'd never experienced. They had bathrooms and inside toilets and running hot water and toilet paper. Don't even ask. Except even now, I can't look at a copy of the South Wales Echo without a million memories coming flooding back. And she took me aside, as I told you, and said to me, son, you have to mix with kids who have more money than us, but I believe in you. You matter to me. I wasn't any good at school. My teacher wrote that in my report. Not only was I no good at school, I was no good at practical things. Not just academic. That's a double whammy, isn't it? When I was 14, in the woodwork exam, we had the choice of either making a coffee table or a potato plunger. You probably don't know what a potato plunger is, so let me help you. You imagine a shovel with the shovel bit taken off the end and just a point on the wood. That's a potato plunger. It's not complicated. You stick it in the ground, it makes a hole for the potato. I looked at the plans for the coffee table. They were quite impossible. I gave that potato plunger everything I had. I prayed over the thing. And finally, I lay it on my desk, and here comes the teacher looking at all our offerings, and he passes coffee table after coffee table, and finally comes to me. And I'm not kidding you, ladies. I can remember it now as if it were yesterday. As if he was standing right there now, and this was my potato plunger. He looked down and said, what is it? I felt that was rather hard. It obviously wasn't the coffee table. I said, sir, it's a potato plunger. You stick in the ground, you make a whole potatoes come up. He said, it's awful. I said, I did my best. And my teacher said to me, Parsons, your best is not good enough. Where'd you go as a kid of 14 when your best isn't good enough? In fact, where'd you go as a woman of 50 when your best isn't good enough? Where do you go? How can you live in a world like that? How can you bear that on your back, always somebody with one more demand, when even your best isn't good enough? I was speaking the other day in a little country church in Wenvo outside Cardiff. They asked me to go and speak, and I stood there, and it was in a school. And I said, my mum used to come to this school when she was a little girl. And before I went to the church, I went around the corner to the little graveyard. And there's her tombstone. And on her tombstone, still today, is what I wrote on it. She loved unconditionally. She loved unconditionally. You know, some mornings I wake far too early. It's like about 5 o'clock in the morning. Far, far too early. And a voice whispers in my ear. You know what, Rob? If people really knew you, they wouldn't come and hear you speak. They wouldn't buy your books. Honestly, Rob, you're a bit of a hypocrite. You don't pray enough. You don't do this enough. You do that. You don't do that. I get that about once a month, 5 o'clock in the morning. But if I am fortunate, I hear a voice in this ear. I think it is inspired by my mother's words, but the voice is much higher voice than my mother's voice. It says this to me: I know you. I know you better than you know yourself. I'm not as impressed with the books as you appear to be, but I still love you. I still love you. So, Rob, you know when you go to the Isle of Man on that weekend to that women's conference, as you're going home in the car, if you think it was a disaster, it probably wasn't as bad as you thought it was. Even if they booed you off the stage, it probably wasn't as bad. And if you think it's great, it probably wasn't as great as you thought it was. So don't take yourself too seriously. Because I love you anyway. With me, there is nothing to prove. Women, there is no freedom like having nothing to prove. To be honest with you, we rarely, I think, if ever, find somebody totally of whom that is true. But in the God of heaven, it is totally true. There is nothing to prove. You and I are loved. Jesus was faced with a leper. When you heard the bell, you began to run. Nobody wanted to be near the leper. And we read the most incredible words. We read these words: Jesus touched him. Now, he needed to be made well, and the master did that for him. But almost as much, he needed to feel those hands again. Perhaps the first time he'd felt human flesh in 20 or 30 years, Jesus touched him. Same thing. You matter. You are somebody. I give you dignity. I touch you. I don't have these experiences very often. But let me tell you something that happened to me. This is my best story, to be honest with you. I don't have one better than this. But it happened to me some time ago. I was speaking at quite a large church. It was a while ago. And as I walked down the aisle, it's about 8 o'clock, they take me to the little vestry at the back to pray with me. Places, a lot of people in the place. And as I go past, this church leader introduces me to his wife. To another church leader's wife, I'm sorry. She's on the edge of a row. And I bend to shake her hand. And she shakes my hand. And as she does, I sense this incredible bitterness. Not towards me, but towards something. And I feel God say to me, I want you to say to her, now, I am your father. I am for you. There is nothing to prove. I love you, but I don't have the courage to do it. It's not my kind of tradition. It's not the world I was brought up in. I just don't have the courage to do it. But when I stand up to speak, I decide I can't ignore this. So I take the coward's way out and I go, ladies and gentlemen, before I start speaking tonight, I just feel like God wants to say this to somebody here today. I am your father. I am for you. I love you. There is nothing to prove. And I go on speaking. As I'm shaking hands on the way out, various people come up to me saying, thanks for that word, Rob, that was for me, thanks for me. But not this woman. And now it's about 9:30 and the place is empty and I'm down the front like this and I'm packing my Bible and my notes away and I'm thinking, oh, well, I got it wrong again. And here she comes down the aisle towards me in an empty church. And she says to me, you know that word you gave? So I said, yeah. She said, it was for me. I say, I know it was for you. She said, what do you mean you know it was for me? I said, well, God told me to tell you personally, but I just didn't have the courage to do it. She said, but you will never know how significant that is. And I said, well, I'm glad it was a help to you. The only problem was, the following week I was at a committee meeting miles away with her husband, and I'm kind of a little bit embarrassed, and I wonder whether he'll be got a bit embarrassed that it's his wife and all this kind of thing has come out. But he comes up to me and says, Rob, my wife was abused by her father. Not physically or sexually, but emotionally, in just about every other way you can think about. She was abused by her father. And he died just the other week. And she is racked by guilt. His image haunts her. In fact, it has distorted her very view of God, as somebody mentioned this morning. Distorted her very view of God. And he said, after the funeral, we went on a short holiday to Spain. And as the plane landed on that Sunday morning when you spoke in the night, as it landed at our airport, I turned to my wife and said, well, I'm going to hear Rob tonight. Do you want to come with me? And she said, I'll come in the last vain hope that God will speak to me. I will come in the last vain hope that God will speak to me. And do you know what I feel this morning and this afternoon? I think there's a woman here, and you came along, but you don't really feel part of this at all. In fact, you probably even thought of leaving earlier on. You feel right on the edge of it. But I want you to know, if that's true, and I don't know whether it really is or not, that God is thrilled that you're here. Thrilled that you are here. It means a lot to him that you're here. Even if you don't really understand it all, and you don't understand the worship, and a couple of people around you seem a bit wacky, and you're not quite sure why they're all doing it, God is thrilled that you're here. Catherine Hill, who will be speaking with me on May the 7th at the Parent Talk Conference, told me a lovely story. She shared it in our staff away day some time ago. She said she was invited to, her and her husband, to a Burns night dinner, a very posh dinner in Bristol. And she was all kind of tuxedos, fancy hotel, and she said they brought the haggis in and they piped the haggis in, and it was all very grand. And then a homeless guy somehow got in. And he was walking behind the haggis as they were bringing it in. And two young men, stewards, got up and ushered him out. And then about an hour later, they had another procession. And this time pipers came in. And sure enough, the homeless guy, big old guy with a big straggly beard and a dirty old overcoat, was walking behind the pipers again. And the two young men got up again to throw him out. But a guy in a white tuxedo from a table in the corner shouted out across the ballroom, "No, wait! There's room at this table for him. There's room at this table for you." And I've got this lovely photograph of these guys with tuxedos and bow ties, and right next to them, this guy with his big gray bushy beard, kind of looking a bit bemused by the whole thing. There is room at this table for you. And however you feel tonight, whether you feel a great Christian, whether you're not sure about this, there is room at this table for you. God is glad you are here. You matter to him. He would come to you now and say, "Daughter." Do you know the funny thing about all our lives is we kind of get a narrative as we get older. It's our kind of software. You know when you turn a computer on, the hardware is basically the same in all the computers, but you load different software, don't you? And you turn this one on and it does great music. And you turn this one on and it does another program and that program. And we've all got that. And the computers look very similar. You can have two Dell computers. They're both silver. They both got a little button. But the second they turn on, they operate differently. And you and I are like that. There are women in this audience, and you wake up most mornings and you look in the mirror and go, wow, what a great face. What a privilege for the world to see that face today. And almost everything you do is just fantastic. You are a brilliant this and a brilliant that and a great this, and your cakes, you die for you. Just wonderful. But there's somebody else in this audience. And you wake up most mornings and you look in the mirror and you think, oh my, I wonder how much Botox costs, and is it worth trying to get a nose job? And almost everything you do, you will fail at. And do you know the fascinating thing is, if we could film both those lives and look at them, we'd find they weren't quite so different. The one who thinks they're great is not quite as great as everything. But we look at our lives through certain colored spectacles so often. We have a narrative that plays out. Jesus spent his life smashing those narratives. He didn't like them. So Zacchaeus is a little guy, he's a nobody, he's a tax gatherer, so the narrative, he is rubbish to God. But Jesus spent all his life upturning those. He said 2 men go up to the temple to pray, and one is religious, and one's just like a publican, like a tax gatherer. He's rubbish in life. But actually, the one who asks for God's mercy is the one who's approved. He loved breaking those narratives up. And Zacchaeus is a little guy, and he's a nobody, and nobody wants to be near him. And he's up a tree because he wants to see Jesus. And Jesus stands in front of the tree, and he breaks the narrative. Zacchaeus, wow. Could we eat together? He just loves to do it. He will not have those narratives. He doesn't like them because he knows how false they are. It is a travesty of the image that God has given to men and women. He doesn't like it when others put them on us, and he doesn't like it too much, actually, when we accept them too easily. Sometimes we have to look again. You know, sometimes, those of you who have children, we give our kids those narratives. You know what Lloyd said to me when he was 14? Because he was the testing one. It was Lloyd who, when he was 5, urinated in a milk bottle in the kitchen, which wouldn't have been so bad if there hadn't been milk in the milk bottle. And that wouldn't have been so bad if Diana hadn't had friends coming round for tea. And that wouldn't have been so bad if Lloyd had admitted before they'd finished drinking the stuff. But as Lloyd, that kid used to wake up every day of his young life with the same prayer on those tiny lips. Dear God, help me drive my mother crazy today. And every day God answered his prayer. He's 34 and God is still answering his prayer. But you know what that boy said to me when he was 14? He said, Dad, I don't think this now. But sometimes when I was little, I used to think you loved Katie more than me. I said, son, I understand that. I understand that. Because whenever there was trouble, you were in the middle of it. And I now know that Katie, the little sneak, used to shove some of her trouble onto you. I once heard him say to a friend, if your sister hits you, never hit her straight back. They always catch the second one. But I'd put a narrative on him. I wanted him to be like Katie. But you know the problem, whether it's a husband, a wife, a child, or a friend. When we try to make somebody be somebody they can't be, we miss the person they are. That lovely heart. And I'll tell you, when they're 14, the tick boxes are easy. We want them to have a tidy bedroom. We want them to do their homework. We want them not to smoke. But that won't be enough when they're 35. If when they're 35, they got tidy bedrooms and they don't smoke and they clean the rabbit out, but they're proud and arrogant and they can't make a friend, that won't be enough for us then. We want a different narrative then. But sometimes those testing kids have wonderful hearts. They care for the poor. They're great friends. And I felt God say to me, Rob, I don't like it when you do that. I want you to look at people as I look at them. It was almost near Christmas, many, many years ago. And there's a knock at our door, and we open it, and there's a man standing in the darkness. I recognize him. His name's Ronnie. Educationally challenged, used to come to our school church, a little group, when we were kids. The Sunday school superintendent would go to the local care home where Ronnie lived. He didn't have a family of his own. And would bring him to Sunday school, and we would torment him for an hour with all the cruelty that kids can bring, and then they would take him back to the care home. But now he's a man, and he's practically living rough, and he's found out where we live. We're only just married. And I open the door on this dark December night, and he's standing there. And in his right hand, he's got a black plastic bag with all his worldly possessions in, and in his right hand, a frozen chicken. And I say, Ronnie, where'd you get your chicken? It's Ronnie, isn't it? Yes, it is. Where'd you get your chicken? Somebody gave it to me for Christmas. Do you know how to cook it? No, I don't know how to cook it. Come on in, Diane will cook your chicken for you. And Diane invited him in, and she cooked Ronnie's chicken. And then she said to him, Ronnie, why don't you stay with us tonight? And he stayed with us that night, and he stayed with us the next night. And Ronnie, don't go home now, it's Christmas Eve. And the next day, we had a little table, and we hurriedly wrapped up some socks and some aftershave, and we gave him some Christmas presents, and he cried. He'd never, ever had a family Christmas. And Ron, don't go home now, it's Boxing Day. And he never left. The kids came after him, and they went before him. Ronnie's still with us. He's lived with us now for almost 40 years. When he'd been with us a short time, he got a job as a dustman. He was a dustman for almost 30 years. And I was in the law practice, and I used to go into the law office, and I'd drop him off at the dust yard on the way. And when I get home at night, he'd always be sat in the same chair smiling. Every night, sat there smiling. And I say, Ronnie, what are you smiling at? And he said, Rob, when you take me to work in the mornings, the other men say to me, wow, who's that brings you to work in the car? And I say, oh, that's my lawyer. I've thought so much about that. Who'd be proud of being taken to work by a lawyer? I don't think it was that. Do you know what it was? Ronnie's narrative was this: nobody wants me. My mother wanted me so little that when I was 5, she put me into care. Ronnie knew that some mothers have to do that, but Ronnie knew that his mother didn't have to do that. And my father didn't want me. And when I was 11, some kids pushed me off a wall and they damaged my knees, and I can't run too well. And when people ask me what school I went to, I say, oh, I went to the special school. And I get my words wrong, and people smile at me and they laugh at me, and my narrative is, Ronnie, you're rubbish. And now suddenly, somebody is at the gate. Somebody is at the gate. And saying, you look nice today, and what you do today, Ronnie, and you shouldn't do that, Ronnie, and I've watched Diane over 40 years tell a different narrative to that man. He's retired from being a dustman now. He works helping a little local care home a little, but every Sunday night he's out working with homeless people. And he came home the other night, and I saw that his new shoes were gone. And I said, Ronnie, where are your shoes? He said, well, I gave them to some guy. I knew Diane had done a great job with him. He's not much of a sportsman, Ronnie. In fact, he's a terrible sportsman. But he came home not long ago from a cricket match. He's almost 70, for goodness sake, but he came home from a cricket match. And she said, how did you do, Ronnie? He said, pretty good. 2 runs and almost a catch. Imagine living with somebody who has praised you so much over 40 years that you've learned to be proud of anything, even almost a catch. Imagine somebody has put a different narrative in your life. Wouldn't that do something for you? Wouldn't you want to do that to other people? Wouldn't you want to give your shoes to a homeless person if somebody had done that to you? And ladies, that's where you and I are today. We are loved. You are his daughter. You are special, but not for our sakes. We are now meant to go. Not perfect. The broken can go. And those who are depressed can go. And those whose kids have broken their hearts can go. And those whose marriages are broken up can go. And those who've got it wrong can go. Those who are forgiven can go. Those who've known the cross of Jesus and the power, we can all go. And it might be making a cup of tea. It might be reaching out. We mustn't wait until we've got it all together. We mustn't wait until we've got the ministry of our dreams. We can begin this very moment to say to somebody else, the narrative that you have always believed is wrong. You matter to me. There's room at this table for you. Itzhak Perlman, one of the greatest violinists perhaps the world has ever seen, had polio when he was 8 years old. And here's the deal when Perlman plays at your concert. The audience are in place, and the conductor's in place, and the orchestra are in place. And then Perlman comes on stage, and he's got a caliper on his left leg. And then he takes his seat to play solo violin, and he takes the caliper off so he can straighten his leg. And on this evening, it is Perlman they have come to listen to, because at the end of the piece, there is a very difficult violin solo, 6 minutes. They've come to hear Perlman. The vast auditorium darkens. And eventually it comes to this violin solo. The audience are hushed and waiting. 30 seconds into that violin solo, one of Perlman's 4 strings breaks. It sounds like a bullet ricocheting around the auditorium. The audience gasps. The conductor drops his baton. And then Perlman waves for them to carry on. And brilliantly, for the next 5.5 minutes, plays the piece, transposing the music from 4 strings to 3. When he finished, there was silence in the auditorium for about 15 seconds. And then people went crazy. The orchestra was standing, banging their instruments. Some of the audience were standing on the seats. And then he asked for silence in the microphone. And when they gave it to him, he shouted the same thing twice into the darkness of the auditorium. All my life, it has been my mission to make music from what remains. All my life, it has been my mission to make music from what remains. Ladies, none of us can do anything about yesterday. Even if life's been hard, we can change it. But the Bible says he can give you back the years the locust has eaten. It doesn't mean tomorrow will be easy. It doesn't mean it's all sorted out. It doesn't mean they're clever answers. But it does mean that tomorrow doesn't have to be like yesterday in our hearts and souls and spirits and the way we look at ourselves and the way we look at other people. And by God's grace, in our lives and in the lives of others, you and I can make music from what remains. Hallelujah.